The wind whipped across the vast plains, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dry earth under the relentless sun. Dust swirled around her ankles as she clutched the edge of her cloak, her heart hammering in a rhythm that matched the hooves thundering in the distance. She had never seen a man like him before, broad-shouldered, with eyes as sharp and dark as a storm cloud on the horizon. Every movement he made seemed measured, deliberate, as if the land itself had carved him from its rugged edges. "Touch me gently," she pleaded, her voice trembling more from fear than desire. Her hands shook and she lowered her gaze, hoping to mask the mix of curiosity and terror she felt. Damn. The world she had known a quiet homestead. The whisper of the wind through wheat fields felt impossibly far away. Here, on this untamed land, rules were different, and every glance carried weight. The Apache warrior studied her with a patience that was both unnerving and commanding. He said nothing for a long moment, letting the silence stretch like the endless horizon behind him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, carrying the authority of a man who had lived and survived in a world that respected strength and courage above all else. 30 nights to make you mine, he said, and the words landed like stones thrown into a still pond, sending ripples through her chest. She wanted to recoil, to run back to the safety of her cabin, but something routed her to the spot. His presence was magnetic, almost unbearably so. There was a fire in his gaze that spoke of stories she could not yet understand, of battles fought and lost, of nights spent under the stars, and of loyalty to a land older than any law she had ever known. Her world felt fragile in comparison, delicate as the petals of a wildflower pressed beneath the weight of the plains. He stepped closer, and the air seemed to thicken, charged with an intensity that made her heart race. Every inch he moved was measured, respectful, yet undeniably powerful. And she felt the invisible thread that tied their fates together tighten with each passing second. I'd been warned about the Apache, about men who lived by codes she could scarcely imagine. But warnings meant little when faced with the man standing before her, solid, unyielding, and yet strangely gentle in the way he observed her. "Why 30 nights?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was defiance in her tone, though fear lingered beneath it. She had never encountered a man who demanded such patience, such restraint, and it stirred a strange combination of apprehension and fascination inside her. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a small leather pouch at his belt, pulling out a worn feather and letting it drift lazily through the air before it landed at her feet. "Because the land watches, and so do I," he finally said. "Nothing is taken without respect, and nothing is given without time. If you are willing, the nights will teach us both what we need to know." Her mind raced, spinning with thoughts of danger and desire, freedom and surrender. The wind carried the distant echo of drums, or perhaps it was only the beat of her own pulse. She sensed that the plains themselves were waiting, holding their breath, as if the earth knew the story that was about to unfold. She had never felt so exposed, yet so alive, the contrast making her skin tingle with anticipation and dread in equal measure. He crouched, lowering himself to her level, and she could see the sharp angles of his face softened only slightly by the fading light. "No one has ever demanded such things of you before, have they?" he asked, and she shook her head. The truth was bitter. Her life had been one of quiet obedience, of following paths laid out by others, never stepping into the wild unknown. And now, here he was, offering something she had never imagined, freedom shaped like fire and wind, danger wrapped in respect. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the plains into a coppery shadow. She could hear the distant call of coyotes, the rustle of brush as small creatures moved through the undergrowth. Every sound seemed magnified, every shadow a story waiting to be told. And through it all, the warrior remained calm, a rock amid the swirling uncertainty, patient and unyielding, yet somehow attuned to the trembling rhythm of her heart. 30 nights, he repeated, and there was a weight to the words that left her breathless. "If you can endure them, if you can meet the land and me without fear, you will understand what it means to be truly free." Her hands tightened around the edge of her cloak. She knew the path he offered would be difficult, perhaps impossible. The nights ahead promised trial and discovery, a journey into the raw heart of the wilderness and the human soul alike. But as she looked into his eyes, she felt a spark, a sense that perhaps she was ready to step beyond the boundaries she had always known. The wind carried a whisper of promise, of adventure, of danger and desire, intertwined, and she felt herself leaning toward it, despite every instinct screaming to flee. The first stars appeared in the deepening sky, cold and distant, yet beautiful in their certainty. She could feel the heat of the warrior's presence behind her, steady and unrelenting, a constant reminder that some forces could not be ignored. Every instinct told her to resist, to retreat to the safety of the world she had left behind. But another part of Hertha, part that had longed for something beyond the ordinary, something wild, stirred awake. He extended a hand, not in possession, but an invitation, and she hesitated. The plains were endless, the horizon unbroken, and yet in that small gesture lay a universe of possibilities. She could not know what the nights would bring, whether her courage would hold, or whether the fire he ignited in her heart would consume or protect. And still, she did not step back. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the scent of smoke and distant thunder. The moment hung suspended, fragile as glass, and she realized with a start that nothing would ever be the same after this encounter. The Apache warrior, the endless plains, the promise of 30 nights, all of it coalesced into a tension she could scarcely bear. One step forward could change everything. One step back might cost her the very freedom she had never truly known. And so she stood, torn between fear and fascination, between the world she had always known and the wild unknown before her. The first night awaited, and with it a journey that neither of them could yet fully understand. The horizon seemed to pulse with expectation, the earth beneath her feet humming with secrets. And she could feel the weight of the warrior's gaze, patient, watchful, unyielding. As the last light faded and darkness stretched across the land, she knew there was no turning back. 30 nights loomed ahead, and with them, a promise she could neither refuse nor fully comprehend. The plains whispered around her, the wind carrying both warning and invitation, and in that moment, she realized that her life had become a story written not by safety or certainty, but by fire, courage, and the unrelenting pull of a man who lived on the edge of the wild. The night deepened, and the first of the 30 awaited. The first night settled over the plains like a heavy cloak, wrapping the land in shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. She stayed where she was, feeling the wind whispering secrets through the tall grass. Carrying a faint scent of pine and smoke from somewhere far beyond the hills, the Apache warrior stood near the fire he had built, the flames casting jagged patterns on his strong features. He didn't speak, but his presence was a constant reminder that nothing in this world came easily, that every choice had weight and every glance carried meaning. Her thoughts drifted, restless, to the life she had known before it as measured by chores, by routine, by the careful steps that kept her safely inside the small world she had inhabited. The cabin, the fields, the quiet evenings spent in candlelight, all of it felt fragile now, almost like a memory from another lifetime. Here, the plains demanded more than obedience. They demanded courage, intuition, and the willingness to face a world untamed and unpredictable. And in the center of it all stood the warrior, a man forged by this land, carrying its history in his eyes and in the lines of his face. He moved around the fire with an easy grace, gathering stones and arranging them carefully, as if the ritual of preparing the camp held significance far beyond practicality. She watched him, her curiosity growing, despite the fear that pressed against her chest like a heavy weight. Who was he, truly? What had shaped him into someone so strong, so unyielding, yet so aware of the fragility of life? The questions twisted inside her, refusing to let her find rest. She realized that the nights ahead were not just a test of endurance, but a journey into understanding a world she had never known. As the fire crackled, he finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "The plains are alive," he said, and she could hear the weight of truth in his tone. "Every wind carries a story, every river remembers. To live here, to belong, you must listen, you must watch. Only then will you understand." She nodded, though she did not fully understand. Listening and watching had been a part of her life before, but never with such intensity, never with the knowledge that the land itself could judge her, could shape her fate as surely as any man. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying, and she felt the tension inside her tighten with every crackle of the fire. Her mind wandered to the warrior's words about 30 nights. The number haunted her, Not because it was long, but because of what it implied: a test, a trial, a journey into something that could not be rushed. She had never faced a challenge like this, never been asked to measure herself against a force so wild and unpredictable. And yet, despite the fear, she felt a strange pull, a sense that whatever awaited her could change everything. The thought made her pulse quicken, and she forced herself to breathe slowly, to calm the mixture of anticipation and dread that coursed through her. The warrior sat down near the fire, reaching into his pouch once more. He drew out a small bundle of herbs, the aroma strong and unfamiliar, earthy and sharp. He began to crush them between his fingers, releasing a scent that seemed to anchor the space around them. "These are for clarity," he said, glancing at her without looking directly into her eyes. "They help the mind see beyond fear, beyond doubt. You will need them if you are to survive the nights ahead." She watched him, fascinated by the care in his movements. There was an intimacy to the ritual, a sense that he was preparing not just for himself, but for her as well. And yet, she could not forget the tension that simmered beneath every word, every gesture. 30 nights was not a simple promise. It was a challenge, one that would test her strength, her resolve, and perhaps her very understanding of who she was. As darkness deepened, the sound of the plains grew sharper, more distinct. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the snap of twigs under unseen feet, all of it seemed amplified in the quiet night. She realized with a start that the world she had known was small and safe, almost meaningless compared to this vast, untamed expanse. And the warrior, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes, was part of that expanse, as much a force of nature as the wind that whipped through the grass or the river that cut through the hills. He spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "There are things you will not understand at first. You will see them, feel them, and only then will their meaning become clear. The plains have rules older than any law, and the nights will teach you to listen." She nodded, trying to absorb his words, but they only deepened the mystery. What did it mean to listen to the land? How could she learn what it wanted, what it expected of her? More importantly, what did he expect? The questions pressed against her like the weight of the night itself, and she felt a shiver of both fear and anticipation. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks drifting into the black sky. She could see the warrior's face in the flickering light, every line, every shadow, revealing strength and stories unspoken. She realized that he had lived through winters and battles, through hunger and storms, and that his world was shaped by survival, honor, and an unyielding connection to the land. And now she was here, a stranger from a quiet world, standing at the edge of everything he had known and everything that would shape the nights to come. Hours passed, though it was impossible to tell by the darkness or the fire. The night held them in its slow, deliberate rhythm, and she felt both trapped and oddly liberated. The plains demanded patience, demanded courage, and demanded that she confront parts of herself she had never known existed. The first of the 30 nights was upon her, though she did not yet realize how small a fraction it was of the journey ahead. She glanced at the warrior, who now stared into the flames, seemingly lost in thought. There was a tension in him, too, a sense that the nights ahead held challenges for him as well. She wondered what memories flickered behind his dark eyes, what battles and losses had shaped him into the man who stood beside her. He was a mystery wrapped in motion, silent but potent, and she knew instinctively that understanding him would be as complex and demanding as understanding the land itself. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke from a distant fire, or perhaps from a camp long abandoned. The plains were vast, filled with hidden dangers and secrets, and she felt a mixture of awe and apprehension at the world opening before her. Every shadow seemed to whisper possibilities, every rustle a hint of challenges to come. And through it all, the warrior remained calm, a figure carved from the wild, steady and patient, yet impossible to fully grasp. She realized that the nights ahead would not just test her endurance, they would test her perception, her ability to read the world and the man who walked beside her. She would have to learn patience, trust, and courage beyond anything she had known. And even as fear coiled in her stomach, there was a spark of something else: excitement, curiosity, a recognition that her life had been on hold until this moment, waiting for a force that would pull her into the unknown. The fire burned low, and the first chill of night crept over her shoulders.
How?
She wrapped her cloak tighter, feeling the weight of anticipation pressing down. The plains were alive, as he had said, and she could feel it in every whisper of wind, every distant sound, every heartbeat echoing through the vast darkness. The 30 nights were beginning, and with them, a journey that promised discovery, danger, and truths she could not yet imagine. She did not move closer to the fire. She did not speak. She simply waited, listening to the plains, to the crackle of the fire, to the steady presence of the warrior nearby. Every sense was heightened, every shadow alive with potential. She understood that nothing about these nights would be simple, nothing predictable, and nothing without consequence. The world had shifted beneath her feet, and there was no turning back. And in the darkness, she felt the weight of the first night pressing down. A quiet reminder that the journey had begun, and that the mysteries and challenges of the plains and of the man beside her were only just beginning to unfold. The first light of dawn painted the plains in shades of gold and amber, but it brought no comfort. The air was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of earth and sage, and she shivered despite the warmth beginning to spread across the land. She had slept fitfully, the fire reduced to embers by the warrior's careful hand, and every sound in the night had seemed magnified, every rustle of grass a warning, every distant cry of an animal a challenge to her courage. She realized that this world did not forgive hesitation, did not allow the luxury of ignorance. Every moment demanded awareness, and she had felt herself tested even in sleep. The Apache warrior was already awake, standing just beyond the fire's ghostly glow. His movements were deliberate, quiet, almost ritualistic as he inspected the land around them. She watched him, curiosity mingling with fear, and saw the way his eyes swept over the horizon, calculating, remembering, as if the plains themselves whispered their secrets to him and only him. There was a tension in his stance, a coiled energy that made her pulse quicken, reminding her that he was not just a man but a force shaped by survival, experience, and the relentless demands of the wild. "You will need to move carefully," he said, without looking at her, his voice carrying the weight of authority and experience. The plains test those who are unprepared. They reveal weakness, and they punish it. You must learn to read what they say. She nodded, feeling the gravity of his words pressing down on her chest. It was not a lesson she could absorb all at once. The land was vast, filled with subtle dangers. She could feel that every step she took from this point forward would matter. Her pulse raced as she tried to imagine what he meant by testing her. Was it survival, obedience, understanding, or all of it together? The warrior moved to a nearby ridge and gestured for her to follow. Every instinct told her to hesitate, but a part of her, the part that had longed for something beyond quiet obedience, urged her forward. As they walked, he pointed out subtle signs in the earth, a broken twig, a flattened patch of grass, the faintest footprints of animals that had passed through during the night. Each detail seemed insignificant at first, but she began to see a pattern, a story that the land told, if only one took the time to notice. "Each mark has meaning," he said, crouching to trace a faint trail with his fingers. "Each sound, each shift in the wind, speaks to you if you are willing to listen. Fear blinds many, but understanding comes to those who are patient." She tried to remember, tried to see the land as he did, but it was difficult. Every noise startled her, every shadow made her heart skip. Yet she could feel herself stretching, reaching for a perception she had never possessed, and a small spark of pride ignited inside her. She was learning, slowly, and even the smallest triumph felt like a victory against the vast unknown. As they walked further, the plains began to open, revealing hills and valleys that seemed to stretch endlessly. The wind carried a different scent here, the musk of wild animals and the sharp tang of distant rivers. She realized the warrior's world was not just one of survival, it was also a world of knowledge, of understanding the pulse of life in ways she had never imagined. And she sensed that the nights ahead were meant not only to test her endurance, but to teach her this knowledge, to immerse her in a rhythm that demanded both caution and courage. At one point, they paused near a narrow stream. He knelt beside it, cupping water in his hands and drinking with careful sips. "Even the smallest streams can teach much," he said. "They carry life, danger, and the history of everything that passed through. You must respect it, or it will betray you." She watched, fascinated, feeling a mix of awe and unease. The warrior's world was alive with hidden lessons, and she realized she had entered a story she had never imagined, one where every choice, every glance, every breath mattered. The tension in her chest grew, knowing that these lessons were only the beginning, that the nights ahead would demand more than she had yet imagined. In the distance, a ridge darkened against the morning light. She noticed movement figures, perhaps travelers or hunters. Her pulse quickened as the warrior's hand brushed her arm, steadying her. "Not all who wander are friendly," he said. "You must judge carefully, but do not act rashly. There is danger in hesitation and danger in foolish haste." She nodded again, feeling the weight of his words. The land was teaching her vigilance, patience, and awareness. But the tension between them, the unspoken pull, the challenge of trust, remained, coiling tight around her like a rope she could not loosen. She felt drawn to him, yet wary, sensing that any misstep could shift the balance between safety and peril. As the day wore on, the warriors shared stories and fragments, tales of past battles, of nights spent under stars that stretched endlessly, and of companions lost and remembered. His voice was steady, but she could detect a hardness, a shadow that hinted at grief and resilience forged in fire. She realized that he was as much a mystery as the land itself, shaped by forces she could scarcely imagine, carrying weight she would not yet fully understand. She began to ask questions, small ones at first, about the land, the animals, and the signs he observed. Answered cautiously, never revealing more than necessary, and she sensed that patience was as much a test for her as observation. Every answer held subtle lessons, every explanation carried unspoken rules about trust and understanding, about learning to navigate a world that demanded respect above all else. By late afternoon, the sun had moved low, casting long shadows that stretched across the hills. They came upon a grove of trees, their branches whispering in the wind. Here, the warrior paused, scanning the ground. "This place is older than most," he said. "It holds memories. Sometimes we learn more from quiet observation than from words." She crouched beside him, trying to see what he saw. There were footprints, faint and overlapping, the signs of deer and smaller creatures, the marks of humans who had passed long ago. She realized that he was teaching her to read life itself, to understand patterns and anticipate movement, danger, and opportunity. And she felt a surge of respect for him, though it was mingled with fear and the awareness that she had much to learn. As the shadows grew deeper, they prepared camp again. The warrior was methodical, careful, setting stones around the fire and arranging their small supplies with precision. She helped where she could, but her hands were clumsy, and he corrected her gently, showing the right way without condescension. The tension between them remained, but now it carried a different weight, a combination of authority, challenge, and the quiet pull of something unspoken, something neither of them dared to name. Night fell again, darker than before, and with it came a chill that seemed to seep into her bones. She wrapped herself in her cloak, listening to the wind and the distant sounds of life. The warrior watched her quietly, a presence that was both comforting and commanding, reminding her constantly that the nights ahead would be difficult, that every choice mattered, and that the land and he would reveal themselves only to those patient enough to notice. "You will need more than courage," he said softly, almost to himself. "You will need patience, clarity, and the willingness to face what you cannot yet see." She shivered, understanding the depth of his words. The first of 30 nights had tested her endurance, but the real journey was just beginning. She realized the conflict she faced was not only with the land, the unknown, and the warrior's challenges, but also with herself, the fear that whispered she could not survive, the doubt that she was unworthy, the curiosity that tempted her to step beyond what she had ever known. As she stared into the fire, she caught a glimpse of movement beyond the grove of shadow, too deliberate to be animal, too distant to identify clearly. Her heart raced, and the warrior's hand brushed hers again, steadying her. "Stay alert," he said. "The plains are never empty. Every shadow has meaning. Every silence speaks. Do not be lulled into false security." She nodded, feeling the tension coil tighter, the stakes of her journey becoming clearer with every passing hour. The nights ahead would not only test her resilience, her courage, and her ability to understand the land, but also her ability to navigate the subtle and unspoken conflicts that lived between herself and the warrior, between fear and trust, between curiosity and caution. The fire flickered and crackled, shadows dancing across their faces, and she realized that nothing about this world or about him was simple. The plains were alive with stories, dangers, and lessons, and she was only beginning to understand the depth of what awaited her. 30 nights lay ahead, each one a test, each one a challenge, each one a step into a life she could no longer imagine leaving behind. The darkness pressed in around them, thick and alive, and she felt the pull of uncertainty stronger than ever. She knew that the first night had only scratched the surface, that the conflicts ahead, both with the land and with the man who had drawn her into this world, were far from resolved. And yet, despite fear, despite doubt, despite the shadows, whispering warnings, she could not look away, could not step back. The journey had begun, and there was no turning back. The night was thick, almost tangible, wrapping the plains in darkness that seemed to swallow sound and shape alike. The fire they had built earlier had dwindled to smoldering embers, throwing only faint shadows across the rugged terrain. She huddled close to it, not daring to move, every sense on high alert. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying a mix of familiar scents: the earth, the sage, the distant river, but also something foreign, something that made her stomach tighten with anticipation. She realized the plains themselves were watching, and with them, the warrior whose presence pressed against her awareness like a living weight. He sat a short distance away, the outline of his figure steady and unyielding. His eyes reflected the firelight, dark and unreadable, and she could not tell what thoughts crossed his mind. She wanted to ask, to speak, but the words lodged in her throat. She felt a pull toward him, a mixture of curiosity, caution, and fear, each emotion twisting against the other. The 30 nights were not just a measure of time, they were a test of endurance, of patience, and of the courage to face the unknown. She realized that each moment now carried the weight of all the nights to come. A sudden rustle in the grass made her jump, and the warrior's head snapped toward the sound, every muscle taut, every movement precise. She watched, heart hammering as he rose slowly, almost imperceptibly, scanning the horizon with a patience born of experience. "Stay close," he said, voice low, carrying authority without harshness. "Do not speak, do not move, unless I tell you." She obeyed, crouching lower by the fire, her eyes wide as she tried to see what he saw. The shadows seemed to shift, twisting into shapes that suggested movement, shapes that might be animals or might be people, or might be tricks of the flickering light. She realized the fear she felt was not just for herself, but for the fragile balance they were maintaining. One misstep, one careless motion, and everything could unravel. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The warrior moved silently, scanning, listening, every motion deliberate, almost ritualistic. She began to understand that the tension between them was mirrored in the land itself. The plains demanded attention, demanded respect, demanded that she watch and learn. She could feel the pull of the unknown tightening, a coil of suspense that pressed against her chest and made each breath feel heavier. Suddenly, a low howl echoed across the plains, distant but unmistakable. She flinched, and the warrior's hand brushed her shoulder again, steadying her. "Wolves," he said softly, almost to himself. "They are curious, but they also respect caution. Move too quickly, make noise, and they test the boundaries. Even they are a lesson tonight." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words. The plains were alive with tension, and every creature, every shadow, every whisper of the wind carried meaning.
Ow!
She realized that the nights ahead would demand more than courage, they would demand understanding, vigilance, and an ability to read both the land and the man beside her. He gestured for her to follow, and they moved carefully through the tall grass, each step measured, each sound weighed. She felt the thrill of fear and anticipation coiling inside her, knowing that the smallest misstep could alert whatever lingered in the darkness, or worse, shatter the fragile connection they had built. The nights seemed to stretch endlessly, a living entity that held them in a delicate balance of watchfulness and suspense. They reached a narrow ridge that overlooked a small valley. The warrior crouched, his eyes scanning the shadows below. She tried to follow his gaze, but the darkness obscured everything.
"Ow, do you see?" asked quietly.
She shook her head, frustrated and tense. "No." "That is why patience matters," he said. "The eyes see what the mind is ready to understand. The land reveals itself slowly. You cannot rush it, and you cannot force clarity." Her chest tightened, realizing the truth in his words. The nights were teaching her not just endurance, but perception, control, and restraint. Every lesson, every subtle movement, added another layer of suspense, another piece of the puzzle she could not yet solve. She sensed that the climax of their journey was approaching, though she could not yet see how or when it would unfold. A faint glimmer in the valley caught her attention, perhaps moonlight reflecting off water. Perhaps something else entirely. The warrior's hand moved to her back, guiding her without words. "Focus," he whispered. "Do not let fear blind you. There is meaning here, hidden, but it exists. We must see it." Her pulse raced as they descended carefully toward the source of light. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle a potential threat. She felt herself stretching, straining to read the land, to anticipate the movements of creatures or men who might cross their path. She realized the nights were as much a test of her mind as of her courage, and that the climax, the moment of ultimate trial, was drawing closer with every step. They paused at the edge of a shallow creek. The water glimmered faintly under the moon, casting reflections that seemed to move independently, dancing across the rocks and grass. The warrior crouched, listening, his eyes narrowing. "Do you hear it?" he asked. She strained her ears. At first, there was only the sound of flowing water and distant wind. Then she noticed a faint, deliberate rustle or rhythm that did not belong to the creek or the wind. Her stomach twisted. Someone or something was moving through the shadows, and it was close. The warrior's hand found hers again, strong and steady. "Stay calm," he said. "The next moments will tell us much. Trust what you have learned. Trust yourself. And trust me." She swallowed hard, nodding, feeling the tension coiling tighter inside her. The valley seemed to hold its breath, every leaf, every stone, every ripple of water alive with potential danger. She realized that the conflict they faced was more than survival. It was about understanding the unknown, navigating trust and caution, and confronting fears that lurked in the dark corners of both the land and her own heart. A shadow moved suddenly, breaking the rhythm of the night. Her heart leaped. The warrior rose silently, positioning himself between her and the unknown. The figure emerged slowly, a man, dressed in weathered leather, eyes scanning for threats. He stopped at the edge of the creek, tense and alert. The plains themselves seemed to hold their breath. The warrior did not speak immediately. Instead, he measured the distance, read the posture, and waited. She realized then that every action, every reaction mattered. The conflict was no longer abstract. It had taken shape, tangible, and imminent, and her training over the past nights would determine whether they survived this encounter unscathed. The man in the shadows shifted, making a step toward them, and the warrior's hand moved subtly to his side, where a weapon rested. The tension coiled tighter, the suspense nearly unbearable. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, her senses stretched to the limit. Every instinct screaming at her to anticipate, to act, to survive. Yet the warrior did not strike immediately. Instead, he waited, watching, listening, measuring the intention behind each motion. She realized that the conflict was about more than violence. It was about understanding. It's about the ability to navigate danger with patience and intelligence. It's about reading not just the land, but the people who moved through it. The stranger paused, his gaze flicking toward her for a brief moment. She felt a chill run through her, sensing that he was aware of her presence, that he had noticed her fear and her attention. The moment stretched endlessly, each heartbeat echoing like a drum across the silent valley. Then, without warning, the stranger turned and disappeared into the shadows. The tension did not dissipate. The warrior remained alert, scanning the darkness, every muscle coiled and ready. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. The danger had passed, but the lesson was clear. The plains were alive, and every step, Every sound, every decision carried consequence. She exhaled slowly, though the adrenaline still thrummed through her veins. The nights had taught her vigilance, patience, and courage. But she knew that the climax of this journey, the trials that would test everything she had learned, was approaching. The tension between them, between herself and between the land itself, had reached a peak. A point where anything could shift in an instant. The warrior turned toward her finally, eyes dark, unreadable, but with a hint of acknowledgement in the way he studied her. "This was the first test," he said. "Many more await. Each one will demand more than the last. Remember, the land watches." "And so do I," she nodded, feeling the weight of his words. The pull of the nights ahead, and the sense that the most intense moments were still to come. The fire crackled faintly, the wind whispered through the grass, and the plains seemed alive with anticipation, as if holding their breath alongside her. The first encounter had ended, but the conflicted true test of courage, understanding, and trust was only beginning. And she knew that the climax, the point where everything converged, would soon demand everything she had learned, and more. The night deepened, and the shadow of the unknown stretched across them, waiting patient and unstoppable, as if the land itself was preparing for the moment when the tension would reach its breaking point. The first light of dawn broke over the plains, soft and golden, chasing away the shadows that had held the night in suspense. She sat by the fire, now warm and steady, her hands wrapped around a cup of water, and for the first time in 30 nights, she allowed herself to exhale fully. The tension that had pressed against her chest for so long had not vanished entirely, but it had shifted. It was no longer a force of fear or uncertainty. It had become understanding, a rhythm that matched the pulse of the plains and the steady presence of the warrior beside her. He approached quietly, his boots brushing the grass with the lightest sound. There was a softness in his movements now, less of the coiled intensity that had defined the nights before, and more of a calm certainty. His eyes, dark and sharp, held something new, a recognition, perhaps, of the journey she had endured and the strength she had discovered within herself. "You have done well," he said simply. His voice carried the weight of approval without pride, the kind of respect that comes only from true understanding. "The nights have tested you, and you have answered. You have listened, observed, and learned." She looked at him, uncertain at first, then slowly nodded. The 30 nights had been more than a measure of time. They had been a journey into herself, into the land, and into the presence of a man whose world was as fierce as it was beautiful. She had faced fear, discovered courage, and understood, in a way she could never have imagined, the subtle language of survival and respect. The warrior sat beside her, the warmth from the fire washing over them both. She realized that the tension between them, the unspoken questions, the quiet pull of curiosity and caution, had transformed. It was no longer a challenge of control or endurance, but a shared understanding born of experience. The land had taught her patience. He had guided her through the lessons with an unwavering presence that had never demanded more than she could give. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the first birds of morning began to rise. She nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle deep within her. The plains were alive, but not cruel. They offered lessons, yes, and challenges, yes, but they also offered clarity and insight to those willing to observe and respect them. And in the warrior, she had found a guide, a protector, and a figure who embodied the strength, patience, and honor of the land itself. The wind shifted gently, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers, and she felt the enormity of what she had experienced. The nights had been difficult, testing every instinct and every ounce of courage she possessed. But they had also revealed a resilience she had never known. She had learned to trust herself, to move carefully but decisively, and to understand the subtle signs of danger and opportunity alike. The lessons were hard, but they were lasting, rooted deep in the rhythms of the land and the shared experience with the warrior. He reached over, touching her hand lightly, a gesture that was neither possession nor command, but recognition. "You have earned your place here," he said. "Not because of strength alone, but because of understanding. That is what matters." She felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of accomplishment tempered with humility. The journey had not been easy. The nights had been filled with uncertainty, fear, and moments where she had doubted her own abilities. Yet each challenge had brought her closer to clarity, and she now understood that strength was measured not by force, but by patience, observation, and courage in the face of the unknown. As the sun rose higher, casting a bright, steady light across the plains, the warrior stood and gestured for her to rise with him. They moved through the tall grass together, their steps measured but unhurried, each one a testament to the lessons learned over the past 30 nights. She could see the subtle details he had shown her at the tracks in the dirt. The signs of animals passing through, the hidden streams and hollows that marked the land as alive and vibrant. Every observation was a story, and every story was a connection between her, the land, and the man who had guided her. They came upon a grove of trees, a place where sunlight filtered through the branches in a pattern that shifted with every gust of wind. Here he paused, looking down at her with a seriousness softened by the morning light. "The journey is over," he said, "but the lessons remain. You must carry them with you, always, whether here on the plains or wherever your path leads." She nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and respect. The 30 nights had been more than a test of endurance. They had been a shaping force, molding her understanding, her courage, and her connection to a world that was vast, unpredictable, and alive with both beauty and danger. As they sat together in the quiet grove, she thought of the moments that had defined the nights, the whispers of the wind, the crackle of the fire, the subtle signs in the earth, and the calm but commanding presence of the warrior. Each memory carried lessons. Each moment a reminder of the strength she had discovered within herself and the respect she had earned from a world that demanded patience and awareness. The warrior spoke again, his voice steady, guiding but not controlling. "Do not forget what you have learned. Fear and doubt will always return, but so will courage and understanding. You have proven yourself capable, and that is something no one can take from you." She looked at him, realizing that their journey had forged a bond built not on possession or submission, but on mutual respect, understanding, and the shared experience of navigating a world both beautiful and unforgiving. The tension that had defined their first nights together had transformed into something quiet, strong, and enduring. The plains stretched endlessly around them, alive with light, wind, and life. She could hear the distant call of birds, the rustle of leaves, the hum of insects awakening with the sun. Every sound, every movement, every shadow was part of a rhythm she now understood, a language she had learned to read. And she realized that the greatest lessons of the past 30 nights were not about fear or survival alone. They were about connection, awareness, and the courage to face the unknown. As the morning deepened, they began to make their way back toward the small cabin that had marked the beginning of her journey. Each step was deliberate, calm, and confident. She felt a new sense of ownership over her place in the world, a recognition that she could move through the plains with awareness and respect, that she could face challenges and read the signs of both danger and opportunity. The warrior walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, but at her side, a presence that was steady and reliable. She realized that the journey had changed them both, though in different ways. He had guided her, protected her, and tested her. But she had grown into a strength he respected, and she knew that their time together had forged a bond that went beyond words. As the cabin came into view, familiar and humble against the backdrop of the endless plains, she felt a sense of closure and new beginning all at once. The journey had begun with uncertainty, fear, and challenge, but it ended with understanding, respect, and an unspoken promise that the lessons she had learned would remain with her forever. The warrior stopped at the edge of the clearing, turning to her with a small, rare smile. "The nights are over," he said, "but remember, the land and life itself will continue to test you. You are ready for what comes next." She nodded, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and anticipation. The journey had shaped her, strengthened her, and revealed truths she could not have discovered otherwise. She understood the land. She respected the warrior. And she had discovered a resilience within herself that would carry her forward. As they stood there, bathed in the morning light, the wind carrying the sense of earth and life, she felt a profound sense of peace. The plains were alive, the journey complete, and yet the world stretched endlessly before her, full of possibilities, lessons, and discoveries yet to come. She looked at the warrior one last time, grateful for the guidance, the challenges, and the patience that had brought her to this moment. The tension, the suspense, and the trials of the past 30 nights had given way to understanding, trust, and a sense of belonging. She realized that the true victory was not in survival alone, but in the growth, awareness, and courage she had gained along the way. The sun rose fully, illuminating the land in a warm, golden light. The plains whispered around them, alive with stories, lessons, and the quiet hum of life. She knew that, though the nights were behind her, the journey of understanding, courage, and connection would continue, guided by the wisdom she had gained and the bond she had forged. With a man shaped by the land and its enduring truths, with a deep breath, she stepped forward, ready to embrace the world she had learned to see, to respect, and to navigate. The 30 nights had ended, but the lessons, the memories, and the strength would remain forever, etched into her soul and carried forward into every step of her life on the plains.